let's get started, since it
Agreed.
sounds like we have agreed that the video is going to be the most valuable part of this. As we all know, Sarah Rankin and Nathan Deron are here representing the Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project, and they're going to address the concerns that we have and the kinds of services that EHP provides. Let's, who wants to go first?
I will go first.
Okay. Take it away, Sarah.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for having us tonight. My name is Sarah Rankin. I'm the public health nurse for Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project. And I'm going to start us off talking a little bit about public health impacts from shale gas development, both from the literature and from some data collection that we have done at EHP. If you're not familiar with our organization, this is our mission statement: to defend public health in the face of oil and gas development. We provide frontline communities with timely monitoring, interpretation, and guidance, and we engage diverse stakeholders, health professionals, researchers, community organizers, public servants, and others, because knowledge protects health. We've been around since about 2012, and we're located in Washington County. This is a snapshot from our website. These are some of the services that we provide. The large wide picture is of the older version of the air monitor we used to use, particulate matter monitor. That's the spec. So that is one thing that we do. We lend out air monitors to communities and provide them with some interpretation of the results over time. We offer something to communities who are facing the prospect of shale gas development coming in, called a health impact assessment. And that is really a tool for communities to be informed and part of the decision-making process. For example, asking what roads the truck traffic is going to be on that's going to be developing the well pad, and other things like that. So it's really, it's a tool for communities to kind of demand that these questions are answered, and so that a fully informed decision is made by whomever is making that decision. The environmental health channel, as you see there, is a way that we convey some of the data that we've collected, the air monitoring and health data. And then featured research reviews is an example of one way that we translate some of the scientific studies that have been done on the health impacts of shale gas development. I won't go through what shale gas development is, since this is the third webinar in the series. I'm sure you've heard it time and time again. But this is from a website called Frack Tracker, and this is from last year. This is 2019's producing wells. There were 9,858 producing unconventional wells in Pennsylvania. The green, as you can see, is gas, so it's mostly gas, a little bit of oil in the northwest, and then condensate, which is, you can kind of think of it as halfway between oil and gas. So this is just kind of breaking it down to kind of organize your thoughts about potential exposure pathways. And this is not taking into consideration things like the bright lights that are on the well pad, the noises, the vibrations, those sort of things that can definitely impact sleep and mental health, which do have real health impacts. But this is thinking more about the possible chemical exposure pathways. So thinking about air emissions like VOCs, like benzene, particulate matter, and nitrogen oxides. These things are coming from leaks and flaring. Flaring, as most of you probably know, is basically combusting either excess product, the natural gas, in order to release pressure or to just get rid of gas that is not wanted. And that the harm comes into play when some of those air contaminants are not completely combusted and they're released. And also with the production of particulate matter with the combustion itself. Truck traffic is producing lots of diesel emissions and particulate matter, and storage pit and tank evaporation is where you see a lot of the VOC. The VOC is released since VOC means volatile, which means it can exist, switches very easily from liquid to a gaseous state. So if you have an open pit or tank of flowback fluid, for example, which can contain a lot of VOCs, it is freely kind of volatilizing or aerosolizing into the air. And compressor stations, which is just another piece of infrastructure designed to keep the gas moving along the pipeline, and those are located along pipelines and they have lots of air emissions of their own. That's not a complete picture. These are just some examples of the pathways related to air emissions. Fracking fluid, some examples include naphthalene, formaldehyde, and ethylene glycol. And when I say fracking fluid, I'm talking about what is going down into the well. And the potential exposure pathways with fracking fluid could be above ground spills, underground well casing leaks, or communication between the aquifers and shale via abandoned wells and fissures. And then flowback fluid or produced water, what is coming back up the well with the gas or oil. So after that fracking fluid has gone and seen the depths of the earth, it has mixed with a lot of the naturally occurring, sometimes radioactive material that is down there and should stay down there, but fracking is bringing it up. Contains things like radium, strontium, and arsenic. And the potential exposure pathways there would include things like those open air storage pits, either leaking or evaporating, potential injection, deep well injection disposal, which is a method of disposing of that fluid. And also reuse in things, products like pool salts or road brine. And also in California, wastewater has been used to irrigate crops. No longer is the wastewater disposed of by a publicly owned treatment work, which is basically a sewage treatment plant. They were directly discharging to sewage treatment plants, which stopped, I believe, in 2016, because it was introducing a lot of problems with trihalomethanes, which are byproducts. When you chlorinate that water, a lot of the organic matter was mixing with the chlorine and creating trihalomethanes, which are carcinogenic. So we have a health questionnaire that over the years we have administered to people in frontline communities. I divided up our sample, so everyone who's filled out a health questionnaire, and divided them into 4 groups and looked at the group that was living, was the most exposed. So it was living the closest to wells and near the most wells. And these are our top symptoms that are reported in that kind of most exposed group. So things like difficulty sleeping and stress, headache, sore throat, itching, burning eyes, shortness of breath, worry and anxiety, fatigue, sinus pain, cough, numbness and tingling, and trouble concentrating. These are health outcomes that have been studied by various universities across the country. And they are divided kind of by category. So these are studies that showed basically that people who live near more and closer to wells have higher odds of these health impacts than people who don't live near shale gas development or are, much farther away from it. So basically, these are health impacts that are associated with living near shale gas development. We don't know exactly what mechanism is causing the health impacts for any given one, but we know that people who live near shale gas development are more likely to experience these. So many of the studies have been done on birth impacts or poor birth outcomes. That is not necessarily inherent to shale gas development, but in environmental health, birth impacts are one of the first things that are studied, and often a red flag that, you know, more long-term health impacts are going to be evident at some point. They are relatively easy to study because of the availability of birth data, and also, sorry about that. Availability of birth data, and also the nicely clearly defined exposure window of the gestation period, 9 months. So you can look back during that 9-month period for a given birth and see, you know, during that time, did the mother live near shale gas development? Other things like hospitalizations, you'll see there's a category kind of symptoms or self-reported health impacts. The cancer studies are, I listed 2 there. One done on acute lymphocytic leukemia, which showed an association, and then urinary bladder cancer, which many of these studies, such as the one done that showed an association with bladder cancer, looked at other health outcomes. So for the Finkel study, they also looked, I think, at leukemia and one other cancer and didn't see associations. So that's important to know as well. The sexually transmitted infections and motor vehicle accidents might be, you know, kind of confusing, but those are have been associated with an influx of temporary workers into an area. So when you're talking about this type of study, these are, and I'm sorry, this is a little blurry, but these are the health outcomes that have kind of the best level of evidence. So these studies assess both the exposure and the outcome at the individual level, which means it's a strong study basically. And it's a lot of the birth outcome studies, the respiratory and dermatologic symptom study, the asthma exacerbation study, migraine headache and fatigue, and rhinosinusitis. There's a lot on this slide and I won't read it to you, but just when we're talking about air pollution, this slide nicely breaks down kind of the stages of gas extraction and the associated chemicals released, and also what the health effects of those chemicals are. Lots of them are carcinogenic, neurological damage. You'll see lots of impacts to lungs, brain, and skin. So one important thing to remember, and I know this is blurry, but I'll give you the big picture of what you're looking at there, is that not all wells are created equal. So gas companies have to report their air emissions. So the VOCs, the PM, and the Knox are reported to the DEP, and emissions can vary dramatically between well pads, and depending on what phase they're in as well. So if we look at the VOCs category here on this picture, and this data was prepared by Jim Fabzak and Erica Jackson at Pitt Public Health, using the DEP Marcellus Air Inventory, which is where those companies have to report their emissions. So you can see for VOCs, this is just Washington County, and there is other county level data available. But so this is for this first category is for single well pads. So that the first kind of blob you see here, and each dot is a specific well pad. And as you can see, this is level of VOCs, and it goes from 0.01 all the way to 100. So, and I'm not even positive what the units on this is, but the point is you have wide variance and levels of magnitude difference between wells. And, you know, there's some clustering at certain points, but it's such a wide range. So while not all wells are created equal, neither are all people. So you have, you know, people who are very sensitive to health impacts from environmental exposures, Developing fetuses are certainly in that category, young children, elderly people, and those with other chronic diseases, things like COPD or asthma, heart disease, basically anything that your body is already dealing with is going to make it harder to deal with either inhalation of air pollutants or certainly ingestion of polluted water. Shifting gears a little bit to water exposure, the Endocrine Disruption Exchange examined 353 chemicals used in fracking and found that many are dangerous to health. 25% can cause cancer, 37% affect the endocrine system, 40 to 50% affect brain, kidneys, and nervous system, and immune and cardiovascular systems, and more than 75% affect skin, eyes, and other sensory organs, and respiratory or GI systems. So a couple of numbers here for you, 356, and this is pretty recently that I looked at this, would be the number of cases where the DEP determined, and this is Pennsylvania, that a private water well was impacted by oil and gas activities. And this list is publicly available. It's online. If you search, I believe, water determination letters, you can see by location and everywhere that was determined. But it took an investigation by Public Herald to find out that that was a really small piece of the pie and piece of the picture. And there were 4,108 total drinking water complaints just between 2004 and 2016. So most of them were dismissed by the DEP, and it's probably more widespread of a problem than has been publicly acknowledged, is what these numbers would lead me to believe. Just to touch base on the childhood cancer issue that's happening in Southwestern Pennsylvania, since it's on a lot of people's minds. This was a story released by the Post-Gazette asking if the 27 cases of Ewing sarcoma near Pittsburgh are a cluster. I'm sure you've heard about it in the news. It's a very rare childhood cancer, about 225 cases across the country each year. So that's less than 1 case per million total population, and less than 3 cases per million of children, which is the most affected portion of the population. In the rural 4-county region in Southwest Pennsylvania, which is Westmoreland, Washington, Greene, and Fayette counties, which has about a population of 750,000. Based on that population, the Post-Gazette calculated that you would expect about 8 cases over a 10-year period. And they did some groundwork and found that there had been 27 cases during the period from 2008 and 2018. If you've been following along, there was a lot of, public outcry to the Department of Health, which led to the announcement of 2 health studies, which are going to be happening pretty soon, we think. The Department of Health is partnering with an academic partner, which to my knowledge has not yet been announced who that would be, to conduct 2 studies. One will be replicating some of those studies that I talked about earlier, which had been done with the Geisinger Health System, looking at things like asthma exacerbations and birth outcomes. And the other study will be specifically looking at childhood cancer in relationship to shale gas development, which is going to be extremely difficult. When you're talking about a very rare disease, it's really difficult to examine environmental factors and what causes those and what does not, which is part of the reason why we don't yet know what causes Ewing sarcoma, because it's so rare. Studying cancer clusters is historically problematic and difficult. One study, Goodman et al. 2012, looked at 567 cluster investigations over the last 20 years. And they found a statistical increase in incidence in 72, which is 13%. and 3 were linked to hypothesized exposures, and 1 of those cluster investigations revealed a clear cause, and that was an occupational exposure, which in the grand scheme of things is easy to identify because you have this regular pattern of repeated exposure. Much more difficult to uncover community level exposures than it is occupational exposures. So, you know, some of the problems with looking at cancer clusters are that the exposure is not characterized well when you're talking about a community, and that's certainly the case with fracking. There are small case numbers, and that is definitely the case with Ewing sarcoma and other childhood cancers in general. You have a mobile population, so when you're looking at someone who developed a cancer, you know, did they live in that location their entire lives? It's helpful when they have, but it's often not the case. There's a latency period in cancer development, so it's developing, you know, far down the line after the exposure occurred. And, but, you know, it's difficult to study these things, but we have reasons to, and scientists and doctors have reasons to believe that environmental causes of cancer are, that we're not potentially giving them enough study and enough credence. Despite the sharp decline in cigarette smoking in the US, cancer incidence has gone up over the past 40 years, which of course there are many reasons for that. And childhood cancer has increased 27% since 1975. And that really, for me, at least, and other people who look at this, points to the fact that environmental causes of cancer are playing a strong role. So there's a study from 2016 that looked at pollutants that may be introduced to the environment through fracking, either through air pollution or water contamination. 80% had not been evaluated for carcinogenicity. So, you know, we don't know if every substance causes cancer or not. We have some idea about it if there have been animal studies or occupational studies, or if tons of people across the country do it, like cigarette smoking. We have a great idea that yes, that definitely causes cancer. But for a lot of these chemical exposures, you know, IARC, or the International Agency on Cancer Research, puts them into categories like it's a known carcinogen, it's probable, or it's possible. So 55 of the chemicals which are used in shale gas development, used or emitted by shale gas development, fell into those categories, and things like arsenic, cadmium, formaldehyde, and radium. So let me back up a second. I say not all of that. I say that all not to discourage anyone, that it wasn't a good, it's a positive move, definitely, that the Pennsylvania Department of Health and the governor have announced these studies, but it is not likely that the childhood cancer study will give anyone clear answers. Just because of everything that I just talked about and how very difficult it is to study these issues. So, you know, it kind of becomes the question of, do we need that level of evidence, or is a more precautionary risk-based approach warranted when we know these chemicals are emitted and used by this process? You know, is that enough? And I'm not here to answer that question, but just something to think about. So, you know, I talked about air emissions, fracking fluid, and just to touch base on the waste problem, which has been in the media recently and is definitely more on people's minds, I would say, of late. The oil and gas industry is exempt from hazardous waste laws since 1988, so there is no official cradle to grave tracking system, and that's for, you know, states, and certainly not a federal one. Past practices of getting rid of waste, which in this case, we're talking about fluid, but there's also massive amounts of solid waste in the form of drill cuttings and sludges. So previously, as I said, it was sent to sewage treatment plants and also discharged directly into streams. Currently, most of the wastewater used in fracking is reused or injected into wells for disposal. And as you can see on this chart, the darker blue lines are the amount of wastewater from conventional oil and gas development, and the lighter blue lines are from unconventional. And you can see since 2008, there's been a sharp rise in the amount of unconventional liquid waste. Last year, Pennsylvania drillers produced 2.7 billion gallons of liquid waste. So, you know, reusing is one option, which is concentrating those things like radium and arsenic that are brought up to the surface. But you know, what happens when fracking slows? There's going to be a big problem of wastewater management at that point. And as I already talked about the product reuse. So in closing, in 2016, the Pennsylvania Medical Society did call for a moratorium on fracking until more studies could be done, until more of the health questions could be answered. That was obviously not heeded by the governor at that time, and shale gas development continues, and we continue to have studies on the health impacts released regularly, which point towards an association with health problems. So what can you do if you live near shale gas development? There's a couple of things, and if in terms of air pollution, paying attention to the weather is certainly something that would be good to do. When it is cloudy and overcast and the wind is not blowing, pollutants tend to hang low and stick around. When it's sunny, when the wind is blowing, they tend to move along a lot quicker. So on days like that, things like closing your windows, turning on a good standalone air filter if you can afford one, those are good ideas. Keeping your home as clean as possible is always a good idea. Things like no shoes in the house, vacuuming with a HEPA filter instead of sweeping, which tends to kind of stir up things on the ground, wiping pets' paws. If you have a private water well, getting baseline and regular testing, and certainly testing the water if you notice a change in smell, the look of it, anything. And venting the air in the bathroom if you're showering with that well water. Sometimes people think just about drinking the water, but the shower is a big source of, can be a big source of exposure to whatever fluid is in the water because of the aerosolization of those small droplets in the mist that's occurring. You're breathing that in when you're in the shower. If you do notice unexplained symptoms, we recommend keeping a health diary, writing down what the symptom is, the time of day that it's occurring, and anything you notice in your environment. So, you know, if you ate something an hour before and that is consistent, if you notice that the well is flaring, you know, prior to, shortly before or right before you experience the symptom, if it's something like coughing or burning eyes, whatever you notice in your environment, write that down and then share that with your doctor is a helpful thing to do. Here is our phone number and website and our email address if you have any more questions. I'm also happy to take questions now directly from everybody who is here. And then, or we can move on to Nathan now and both take questions at the end. It's up to you guys.
Well, I'll just ask you, Connie said, is EHP ever asked to present this information to township residents before fracking is permitted by township supervisors?
Yeah, so that would be the goal. That is really an ideal time for us to come in. I don't, in my tenure at EHP, which I've been here since the beginning of last year, I can't actually think of a time when I participated in an event like that directly, but I do know that it has happened, and yeah, that would be ideal for us to be able to get a baseline, especially with something like air monitoring. If it is going to come in, getting a baseline of air monitoring before and after, and also we have the tool, the health impact assessment, that can really help a community before the decision is made. But it's difficult to get in there before it happens. I think I answered the question. Please tell me if I didn't.
You did.
Okay.
That's all I have at the moment.
Okay. Let me stop sharing. Hold on one sec.
It's like
I can stop you there.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. All right, can everyone see my screen?
got it.
Great. So thank you for that overview of health effects from living near the fracking industry, Sarah. That's very important, and I'm going to loop back around to some of that in my presentation. As Reed said at the top, my name's Nathan Deron. I am the environmental data scientist at the Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project, and today I'm going to talk to you about air monitoring, what it can do and how we do it. So, my slides are not, there we go. Okay, so just for the second half of the webinar, I'm gonna take just a couple minutes to give a brief overview of Saxonburg, which is the community at issue here. Then I'm going to talk about the measurable pollutants that we collect information on, the tools that we use to do that, how we interpret the results from those tools, and then open it up to questions. So to get started, Saxonburg is the town where a lot of the Knoch school district facilities are located. And we have two nearby Title V facilities, although they're not all that close. Title V facilities are simply facilities that produce enough air pollution that the EPA decides they actually need some additional monitoring and permitting. There are two, the AK Steel Butler Works and the Armstrong Cement and Supply, that are within a reasonable distance of Saxonburg. However, these are not the facilities we're necessarily most concerned about in Saxonburg. Instead, here's a look at the town and the local emitters. Down here on the left, this is the gas well that's mostly in question. But we do also have another emitter here from the DEP database, Penn United Technologies Incorporated Carbide Division. However, these are classified as the lowest type of emitter that is included within that database. So we're also not all that concerned about these folks down here. Up here, you also see another well pad that was proposed and beginning development, but it seems, as far as I'm aware, that that has been halted for the time being. So what we're really most concerned about is the well pad down here. Why are we concerned about that one? Well, it is surrounding quite a few populations of concern. Sarah said in her presentation earlier that not all people are equal, much like not all wells are equal. And unfortunately for the folks of Saxonburg, this well pad is very close to a lot of potentially vulnerable folks. That includes the high school with almost 800 students in there every day in normal times. I am actually not sure if anyone is there these days, but we also have the South Butler Intermediate Elementary School down here with over 300 elementary school students, even more vulnerable than high school students generally. And we have the VFW nearby. This is a community spot where folks of all different ages may be spending a good amount of time, and it is also quite close to this well pad. So this is, this doesn't look great for sure. And we know that living near oil and gas development can be dangerous. However, a lot of the research makes it difficult to understand how that might impact any given person. So what EHP does is we look at particular pollutants that we're able to monitor to try and get a better idea of what exposure may be. And I want to be very clear here, EHP, we monitor VOCs and particulate matter at the current moment. This is a very small portion of the sources that may be impacting your health. So this is not going to give anyone a complete picture of all of the ways that oil and gas development could be affecting health. However, it does give us something to work with and a way to begin to think about the problem. So we collect information on VOCs and particulate matter, both air emissions. PM 2.5 is the first pollutant that we focus on, and the 2.5 means that the particulate matter in question is 2.5 micrometers or smaller. These are called fine particles. There are other kinds of PM that are also measured by our monitors and by other organizations. However, we think PM 2.5 is where we want to be focusing our attention due to the fact that it is small enough to penetrate the deep lung, which can lead to serious health problems. PM 2.5 comes from a heck of a lot of sources, and I'll get into that a little later. But something that is really important to highlight here is that higher PM 2.5 will worsen the effects of other harmful chemicals released by oil and gas activities. So even if the gas well near the Knoch County School, the Knoch School District High School, was not the emitter of these PM 2.5 particulates, that doesn't mean we want to be concerned, because it's going to exacerbate the health impacts that do come from that gas well. So here is a graphic that gives you an idea of how small we are talking. On the left here, you can see a much enlarged human hair, and these particles are tiny, and they are very much able to get into the deep lung and stay there, affecting your health. These are, much smaller than sand, and you can see here also on this graphic PM10, which is going to be much larger and something that you may be able to see, especially if you're, sweeping your home and seeing those clouds of dust go up. This is quite a bit smaller than that. And as I said, there are many different sources of PM 2.5. So from oil and gas development alone, truck traffic, diesel generators, the well flaring that Sarah spoke about earlier, frac sand and compressor stations all generate PM 2.5. But so do many daily activities. Of particular note is around schools. School buses are huge sources of PM 2.5. So there's going to be sources all around a given community of PM 2.5, including the one shown here from oil and gas development. The other group of air pollutants that we measure here at EHP are the volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, that Sarah spoke about earlier. These are a very large variety of chemicals with different short and long-term health effects. These are, again, all around us and in a lot of the products that are in our homes and our schools every day. Because they are in these products that exist around us, and mostly household products like paints, refrigerants, dry cleaning agents, those sorts of things, we generally see concentrations of many kinds of VOCs to be consistently higher indoors, up to 10 times higher than they are outdoors. However, we generally look at outdoor VOCs as these are VOCs that could be coming from oil and gas development. And the outdoor VOCs could be getting into your home or your school and raising that amount up even further, as well as giving you some exposure to VOCs while outdoors. Here are a few of the health effects that different VOCs can cause. These are varied because VOCs themselves are very varied. They come in a lot of different varieties that affect your health in different magnitudes. So some VOCs we may be less concerned about than others, which makes measuring the health impact of VOCs as a group a bit tricky. So those are the two kinds of pollutants that we're monitoring, and how are we doing that? We have three main tools that we currently employ: purple air monitors, AirViz VOC monitors, and Summa canisters. So real quick, I'm going to go through this table. The purple air monitors measure that particulate matter, that PM 2.5. These are continuous monitors that are always gathering data, and that data is then uploaded to the internet so you can see it online in real time. And not just your own, you can look at any monitor that is a purple air and made accessible to the public. So this is really powerful for us because we can use a lot more information than we generate. And this, again, is going to monitor those byproducts of fuel combustion, no matter the source. These AirViz VOC monitors measure something called TVOC, or total VOCs. So these are going to give us a single number that is essentially the aggregate total of VOCs in the air at a given time. As I mentioned, VOCs vary pretty not drastically, but they do vary significantly within that category. So it's difficult to say what any given level of total VOC is, it's hard to say what the health impact, of any given level of total VOCs is without knowing the constituent parts of that mixture. These VOC monitors, however, are also very nice in that they are continuous. They're always taking readings. That data goes online where it's available in real time to the public. And one nice thing about these monitors is they're picking up VOCs which have outdoors a lot fewer sources. So when we pick up VOCs, we are more likely to be seeing something that is coming from the gas well than we are something that's coming from something like a school bus. We also use Summa canisters. So these are, big canisters made of metal that we take out to the field and open them up, collect a sample of air, and then send it off to a lab. And they analyze it to see, okay, in that 24-hour period where we were collecting air, what was in it? And this helps address some of the shortcomings of that AirViz VOC monitor, because with the Summa data, we're able to understand what's in that mixture. And we can see, oh, there's really high levels of benzene, which is really dangerous. We should be very concerned. Or, this, while there are maybe moderate total VOCs, none of the main constituents of the mixture are all that harmful in comparison, so we might be less concerned. Unfortunately, the Summa data does have some shortcomings of its own. The data that comes off of these gets mailed back from the lab, and we have to, process that and analyze it and return it to communities. but being able to understand what is in that mixture is important. Another shortcoming, however, of Summa data is that it is only taken in that 24-hour chunk. So if we're out there collecting air on a day that the well isn't emitting what is actually causing the health problems for folks, then we're not going to be able to see it. So that is another shortcoming. It's not continuous. Here's a look at that purple air map. This is the very nice interface that they create, and you can see the monitors that are near you, and you can look at readings over time. And unfortunately, it does seem that there are not all that many monitors near Saxonburg. But if you go down south into Pittsburgh, there are many, many monitors, which is definitely helpful for that community. This is the VOC Monitor Output, not as engaging, granted, but still very important, and we're able to see spikes in these numbers that, you know, as I said, we're not able to say this is the number that if you go over, you're going to have a health effect, because we don't know what's in that mixture. However, when we see something like this, we can go, okay, maybe you want to look at what's going on around that time, look at the weather, look at other factors, and see if we can figure out if something's happening. Finally, this is a look at what the Summa analysis results look like, even more dense, even less sort of engaging for a community, but this is where EHP's expertise comes in, where we're able to look at results like this and give a community like Saxonburg an idea of our level of concern. So we get all these results, and then what EHP does is we attempt to interpret them. The first question we hope to answer is, should I be worried? Are the levels that you're seeing something that would generate concern? And this is a hard question to answer because often we're not necessarily clear about what are we worried about? What are we asking that question about? So if we're just asking about air pollution in general, we have ways to address that. So using the monitor data we get back, we can compare to certain standards that exist. For instance, PM 2.5 has standards set by the EPA, both for 24-hour limits and annual limits. And all of the, not all, but many of the chemicals that are returned in those Summa reports have short-term exposure limits that are set both by NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, as well as OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So those are standards that are set that the government says, hey, you should not be exceeding these levels over a given period of time. We're also able to, there unfortunately, however, is not a similar standard for this total VOC figure returned by the AirVis VOC monitors. We are also able to compare the results from a given community to available comparison groups. So even if a standard is not exceeded, there are often effects below that standard. And we're able to compare a monitor reading to another group. Some of these are more helpful than others. For instance, the Summa data, we're really only able to compare that to past EHP participants. And all of our participants are folks that are near oil and gas wells. So saying, hey, you're just about average for people that are potentially being exposed to harmful toxins from oil and gas development, it's hard to know what to make of that. However, with purple air PM 2.5, we are able to compare that data to purple airs across the country, which is definitely a more representative comparison group, as well as EPA monitors. So EPA has monitors across the country, and we're able to compare our own data against those EPA monitors to get a sense of where does a given community's readings lie in the grand scheme of readings across the country. Additionally, we can apply a lot of that research that Sarah was talking about to a community, saying, okay, we can look at data in the same ways that these researchers have and see what the effects could be in this situation. This is something we are trying to think more about. We haven't done all that much to date about applying this research to given communities. But with both Summa data, but especially particulate matter data, there is a lot of applicable research out there. The downside is the TVOC number has very little research around it, even though that is a powerful tool in terms of monitoring. So there are, again, all these sorts of trade-offs here. Now, so that's it, answering the question, should I be worried about air pollution in my community? What a lot of communities actually are asking, however, is should I be worried about a particular gas site? And this is a harder question to answer because seeing given levels of pollution in a community doesn't mean that those toxins or those emissions are coming from a gas site or a particular gas site. And that makes our job much harder, and it makes communicating this information a tricky business. But we do have a couple tools to try to look at this. One is the polar plot that you see here on the left. This is looking at readings at a given monitor and just getting an idea of, on average, when we see elevated concentrations of particulate matter or that total VOC number, where is the wind blowing from and how hard? That'll give us sort of an aggregate, a high-level understanding of general weather and a really sort of basic idea of the direction we might want to be looking in for a source. We can also do pollution plume modeling, which is something else that's very new to our organization. This is utilizing a model that's been developed by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and implemented by Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon University to generate these sorts of plume models. So we can look at, okay, we see a spike on a given day, like I showed you on that total VOC output. Is it plausible? Is it feasible that that came from the well pad nearby? And we can't say, there's not a situation now that we can say, yes, it definitely did come from there. But we can say if it's possible or plausible that it did so. So we can model what that site's emissions would look like if it was emitting high amounts throughout a given day. And then if we see when that plume crosses over our monitor at the same time that the monitor peaks, that it is possible that that site was able to impact that high reading. So, we really need to be mindful about which of these questions we're really hoping to answer when we go into a community. This is the other question we hope to answer in our interpretation in my last couple minutes here. What can I do? It's not great to tell somebody they should be worried and give them nothing to do. So we hope to be able to say something about potential actions that can be taken. And the first thing you can do is protect your health with all of these amazing tips that Sarah shared earlier. And the secret here is you can do these even without an air monitoring project. You don't need us to tell you that there are elevated levels of various air pollutants in your area to know that the research says there are health effects from living or working or going to school near oil and gas wells. So some of the most important things any individual can do to protect their health can be done right now. You don't need air monitoring to pay attention to the weather, to run air filters. These are always good things to do to protect your health. Something that our analysis may help with, however, is engaging at a higher level to try and protect your community. And a lot of the work on this slide is work that EHP is working on getting into. So with a few exceptions, not a lot of these projects have been fully fleshed out. But this is the kind of work that we are trying to do. And that includes in doing weather modeling to show these plausible paths of harm when pollution is at its highest. So when we would do that, we would then hope to work with local leaders, skipping down to the third point here, working with local leaders and the gas company to avoid those situations where there is a plausible path of harm, and we expect that the given conditions, the time and weather conditions, and where those emissions would end up, namely here in the school, we would want to work with local leaders and the gas company to say, hey, we think there's a real potential for harm here, and we would ask that you not engage in high emitting regular maintenance during those times, for instance. Again, this has not been something we have done yet, but this is sort of a hopeful way forward. Something that has happened are alert systems. So a community that we worked with around a compressor station in New York State was able to take some of the information that we presented to them to the gas company and local politicians to advocate for an alert system so that everyone in the community would be told when high emission events were happening, blowdowns, venting, flaring, things like that. So that is something that has happened and is possible. It's difficult, don't get me wrong, but it is possible. And something else is working with local politicians and the state DEP to limit expansion of these sites. So again, this is work that we are dipping our toes into at EHP, but trying to gather together local leaders and the state to make sure that health is being protected is another way that we may be able to utilize the information that's returned from these reports in a way that goes beyond the individual actions one can take to protect your own health to going to another level, to having a larger impact in actually protecting your entire community. So with all that said, here again is contact information, and I'd like to open it up to questions for either myself or for Sarah.
I have one here. Looking at the geographic relationship between per W71 fracking site, which includes a pig launcher, and the school campus in downtown Saxonburg, where would it be good to install some monitors to get a picture of what effects the pad are inflicting on the school and the borough?
Well, that's another hard question. So implicit in that question is saying we really want to know, should we be worried about this well pad? Not should we be worried about air pollution at the school in general? So, frankly, it would be best to have a network of monitors around the area to be able to track plumes of pollution coming off and seeing if and when they are impacting the school. It would probably be good from the standpoint of understanding potential health impacts to have some monitors on school grounds to see what is actually getting to students. However, there are simply political difficulties with that as well. When we do monitoring, we generally like to monitor at homes because we need the permission of one individual, the homeowner. When you get a school involved, then you have to deal with a school board, and that gets a lot more complicated real fast. I don't know if that fully answered the question. You can tell me if it did or did not.
We have so many limitations. I have an elementary school, a son who's 10, and even just trying to talk to people on the board about EHP has been fruitless, completely fruitless for me personally. So I can imagine there's a lot of roadblocks. Is EHP involved in any way in monitoring radioactivity, like John Stoltz discussed last week, the radioactivity released from breaking up the shale?
So we are doing work on this topic for sure. We don't have tools ourselves to monitor radioactivity, but we are certainly listening to people like John Stoltz and Julie Wetherington Rice, who have the great information about, you know, what are the best kind of tests to do for soil and water. We are working on a community radioactivity monitor resource guide, which is a much larger task than it sounds like. So we're working on that. We have a student working on a project looking at kind of navigating surface water databases. So, you know, with the Public Herald article that came out about leachate, and I'm going to address another question that was asked too. Since the Public Herald article came out, and, you know, for example, also Justin Noble's Rolling Stone article, we have been thinking a lot about surface water impacts. So, you know, how this waste is making its way into our local surface waters, into streams, and whether it's leaving traces there of radioactivity, radium-226 and 228. And, you know, the other big question is that radioactivity then potentially making its way to drinking water treatment uptakes? So we have a student who will be doing a kind of train the trainer in weeks coming up, so kind of an informal webinar. He's done a lot of work and talked to people at the DEP about navigating two of their databases. So one is the surface water database, which monitors local streams and rivers, and the second one is the drinking water database. So looking at what radioactivity tests have been done over the years, what those results have been, how you can look up the information pertinent to your area using those databases. And I see someone commented, I think John Stoltz contradicted that information about sewage treatment plants. So let me clarify what I said. So sewage treatment plants, or POTWs, publicly owned treatment works, do not directly take fracking wastewater. So that we're talking large quantities of directly untreated wastewater. They don't go directly to sewage treatment plants. What does make its way to sewage treatment plants is landfill leachate. So landfills that are accepting tons and tons and tons of solid drill cuttings, which contain that radium. When any liquid any liquid within the landfill percolates down, it doesn't go directly into the ground, which is good, but it is collected in a system of drains, and that liquid is called leachate, and that leachate does go to sewage treatment plants. So that is how that radioactivity from the fracking waste stream is potentially making its way in, and it is because it's been measured in the sediment in streams near those sewage treatment plant discharges. So yes, we are looking at that issue pretty closely and trying to figure out how we can kind of help the communities understand what is known, what is not known, and what could potentially be known.
That's all I have at the moment. Anybody else?
Okay, well, that sounds like a wrap. Thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts and explaining so nicely what EHP is doing these days. We've tracked EHP's progress over the last several years, probably since pretty close to its inception, and you're doing a lot more now than you were 5 years ago.
Well, thank you.
Can I break in here for, I'm sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you so much for having us, and go ahead.
I was just going to remind people that if they have any questions or they want to contact us, they can contact you, obviously, through the number and the links you have posted here, the email address. You can also contact MOB, Marcellus Outreach Butler, through our website. There's a contact us button. And if you have any questions or concerns or you want to get in touch with us, please do.
Good. Okay, well, any other questions or observations? Sounds like we're finished. Thank you guys.
Okay.
Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Yes.